Welcome to the Trauma-Informed Lens podcast. I'm your host, Matt Bennett. Each episode we talk about the research and practical aspects of the trauma-informed movement. This podcast is not designed to replace mental health services. If you feel uncomfortable or triggered by our discussion, please consider seeking your own trauma treatment. In no way is seeking treatment an admission of weakness. It is a chance to build resiliency and experience post-traumatic growth. You can find show notes, resources, and more at traumainformedlens.org. Welcome, friends, to the Trauma-Informed Lens podcast. I got two very, very special guests here to talk about a topic I'm incredibly fascinated with trauma-informed design. If you're wondering what the heck that is, stay tuned because I cannot wait to dig into this topic with our guests. Just before we get started, I do have a little bit of announcement. I just published my fourth book, Healing with Heart Rate Variability. As many of you know, I haven't been going traveling and doing training, so if you give me about 2 months of a lot of free time, of course, I'm going to write another book. So because I haven't been able to do a lot of positive stuff during COVID, you can actually download the ebook version of that at optimalhrv.com. So I can't do much else, so at least I can give you all a free book. So again, optimalhrv.com. I'll put a link in the show notes at traumainformedlens.org. But I'd love just to give it away. So if anybody's interested in that, on the podcast, we'll be talking more about that in future weeks as well. So enough with announcements. I am so excited to have Jennifer Wilson and Laura Rossbert here to talk about trauma-informed design. So Jennifer, let me have you introduce yourself first. And sure. I want to have you just follow up a little bit with your introduction with, give me a maybe one sentence definition of trauma-informed design, and then we'll have Laura introduce herself and then jump into it in a lot of detail.
Jeepers. Well, first things first, congratulations on your fourth book. That's amazing. And the fact that you only needed a couple months to just sort of whip that together is is beyond impressive. So congrats on that. So like Matt said, my name is Jennifer Wilson. I am trained as a social worker. I've largely worked with folks experiencing homelessness, youth, families, couples, and now I am working at the University of Denver's Center for Housing and Homelessness Research. It's housed at the Graduate School of Social Work. And there I'm also working on my PhD. And so I am in the dissertation phase of the PhD, and I'll be here for a little bit. But that's how I got involved with the project through the center doing research. Trauma-informed design, it's funny. I was just sort of brushing up on our white paper just to make sure that I was on top of things. And I guess I would say that it is using trauma-informed care, which is sort of known in fields that, provide services to folks, using trauma-informed care or applying it to the built environment so that we can imagine spaces also being trauma-informed, being strengths-based, being dedicated to healing and to empowering people and to not re-traumatizing folks. And so I think Laura can give a much more elegant description, explanation, but I'll start with that.
I thought that was well done. So Laura, please introduce yourself to our folks and build upon that initial definition in any way you wish.
Awesome. Yeah. So Laura Rossbert, I work at Shopworks Architecture. I've been here about a year and a half. Before that, working at Shopworks, I actually spent my whole life in the nonprofit world, doing both community organizing, and most recently I was at the Dolores Project as their deputy director and interim executive director, and oversaw a housing building where we built a new homeless shelter from the ground up, which usually homeless shelters, you use retrofitted space, but we got to dream and vision and get what we wanted. And then also 35 units of supportive housing and 95 units of workforce housing. We did that all in partnership with Rocky Mountain Communities, who's a great organization that does a lot of affordable housing around Denver. and that kind of was the birth of this project for kind of my role and Jennifer's role, and also Group 14 Engineering helped us on this project as well. Our kind of core team of researchers, but really thinking, I was implementing trauma-informed care in the homeless shelter and doing a lot of training while we also were designing a brand new building. And so we brought the architects in, Shopworks, to have a conversation and just say like, hey, you should listen in on this. Trauma-informed care matters for us. And it really blew the architects' mind, because architects are trained to think about space. I mean, architects have to think about 100 things on every single design decision, right? But mental health is not something that in architecture school they really highlight. And when you look at ACE scores and things of that nature, especially when working with folks experiencing homelessness who have higher ACE scores, but frankly, the vast majority of Americans have an ACE score of at least 1. So, you know, we really focused on supportive housing in this research project. For me, the thing I always think is important is designing with trauma in mind is not designing for those people over there. It's designing for all of us. And I think if I had to give my one sentence thing, because I also got more time than Jennifer did on this question, I always think the easiest way for me to think about it is designing around kind of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So often folks building affordable housing, it's like, good for us, we created housing. Yes, but. So for me, trauma-informed design is not just building apartments that help people survive, but it's about building buildings that help people thrive. And what does that look like? And for me and Jennifer and the team, the only way you can do that is if you're prioritizing the voices of those with lived experience, because they know what they need in a way I can never know what it is like to have the specific traumas that others have had and exist within a space. And so I don't know, Jennifer, do you want to give a little bit of an overview of kind of our research project? And then I can share about kind of some of our findings or how that gets lived out in buildings, kind of whatever you want to share first.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, I hope it's okay that we're just sort of
running
with it.
I'm here to learn. So
go ahead and like make a sandwich and just
I'm enthralled. So you all keep going. Everybody on this podcast has heard way too many hours of me talking. So you two just go. I'm going to sit here and learn.
Well, we really appreciate being able to share about what we've done, and we've enjoyed working together, I think, as this very interdisciplinary group. And so yes, I will share a bit about our preliminary research, which is ongoing sort of rapidly. So last year we did 3 site visits, and we did focus groups at these different sites with supportive housing buildings that had sort of a trauma-informed care approach already infused in the design. And they were in Denver and Fort Collins. We did a total of 11 focus groups at the 3 different sites with residents of the buildings, but also we tried to meet with staff at all 3 of the buildings. But we were largely focused on meeting with residents. And so we did the 11 focus groups, and we also did tours of different units, tours of the buildings, all given by residents. And then on top of that, we also did online surveys. So it was a mixed methods approach, qualitative focus groups, and then also the quantitative surveys, which they really just sort of corroborated one another. What we found was we went through this really iterative process. People had so much to say about their experience of living in these buildings, things that were helpful, that they really appreciated, that they enjoyed, places that they liked to be, that they felt safe. And then on the flip side, places that they didn't feel so safe, ways that they felt isolated, things that they didn't like. And we went round and round and round. This is interesting, but how do we bring it together in a way that is instructive or helpful for the very vast network of people who could possibly use this information? I mean, not just developers and funders and architects and designers, but staff who are staffing these buildings, and communities who are, fighting for these projects, everyone. And so where we landed was sort of at the heart of all of this information was the idea that people were talking again and again and again about what we called what we're calling the 3 C's of designing for health and healing. And so they were talking about comfort, the fact that, and they were talking, let me give you the 3 C's: comfort, community, and choice. That's what we kept hearing, variations on those themes. So with regards to comfort, they were talking about how there were all of these special details, attention to aesthetics, things that felt warm and felt beautiful and comfortable. They were talking about incredible artwork. They were talking about even just like the calming hues of the walls, the paint colors. They were talking about the incredibly comfortable couches. And there was one focus group where one person mentioned the couches and everybody just got so animated. I love the couches. The couches here are the best. I sleep on my couch most nights. And I feel like when you think about trauma-informed care and a trauma-informed lens, that makes a lot of sense. That, you know, if this particular building was housing a lot of folks who had experienced homelessness, maybe a couch represents lots of different things. Maybe it's the comfortable place that they're familiar with from years of couch surfing. Maybe the vantage point of the living room feels a bit safer because you can see all of the entrances and exits and windows. It's near the television usually, which is a source of sound and light. And so the couch begins to represent something larger than just a piece of furniture, a furniture decision. Folks talked about light and their desire to have like pure darkness in their rooms when they were sleeping. And sort of the idea that an element of comfort in a space could be the ability to dim your light or to have blackout shades to completely knock all the light out of a room. And again, from a trauma-informed lens or viewpoint on the topic of homelessness, typically if you're sleeping in a shelter, you're not getting to sleep in a pitch black room. There are lots of different lights and noises, or if you're sleeping during the day so that you can be awake at night to be safe, you're not getting that darkness either. And so these are just elements of comfort that came up. The second C was community, and this is the 3 C's is the focus of the research, I'd say. So I'm focusing here for a bit.
No, it's great.
Cool. So I'll just keep going.
Go for it. I love it.
So community was really interesting. I kind of like to talk about these findings a lot because I think initially we were talking about our research group, we would talk about social interaction. And it was this sort of, it was a mash of sort of any person interacting with any other person in any way, but we hadn't sussed out like the nuance. And so what we were hearing, one of the findings was that it really sounded like people were talking about different levels of community interaction. There was interaction inside the building, and then there was interaction outside of the building. And within the building, there was interaction with staff, and they were talking about how they really appreciated the opportunity to meet and get to know one another in close proximity to staff members. And they wanted staff spaces close to resident amenity spaces so that they could feel safe meeting one another. And then at that point, they would invite each other into their apartment unit perhaps. And so there was interaction with staff. There was interaction with people directly on your floor. I mean, these are the folks that you share a laundry room with or a trash room with. And when you think about the community lens on design and the built environment, it means perhaps rethinking something like a laundry room or a trash room and how there are these tight spaces with a single point of entry and exit that force potentially physical interaction. You imagine walking by someone to get to the washing machine or touching someone else's wet clothes to get into the washing machine. And so perhaps rethinking a space that we take for granted, like a laundry room, with a trauma-informed lens. And then we also heard people talk about interacting with people in the building who share interests. Those who garden, those who smoke, those who play chess, whatever it is. And so as you're sort of designing each space, a staff space or spaces on a floor, that you're imagining sort of the different ways the community might interact. And then outside the building, there were stories that came up about people interacting with guests and visitors, and how their guest or visitor was interfacing with the space. So one woman talked about her home health aide and how she couldn't get She couldn't get into the building because access was so difficult, and she was unable to get out of bed without assistance. And so the fact that the home health aide couldn't get in was a real problem, felt very undignified. One woman in one of the focus groups shared that her husband lived separately from her, and she didn't want him up in her apartment, so they would meet outside the building. But there was nowhere to meet with someone outside the front of the building, so they would sit on the sort of street corner next to the sewer, and that's where they would be like working through their relationship and next steps. And so just thinking about how someone might interact with someone outside the building, then also thinking about the neighborhood and how the neighborhood perceives the building, and thinking about a person's interaction with the greater sort of city. And so access points and bus routes and walking trails and that kind of thing. And so the third C, I promise I'll get to it, is choice. And so choice came out. I mean, choice is the 3 C's overlap, obviously. And choice comes out in sort of everything that everyone had to say about everything in the building. It was what space they choose to engage with. Do I stay in my apartment unit? Do I go out to seek the company of others? Can I personalize my space? Can I make choices about where I live and what it looks like? And like at Arroyo Village, they were able to choose the color of furniture. They had 2 choices, I believe, Laura. And so they were able to make a choice about their furniture color when they first moved in. So even just the choice around personalization. But we found that on the opposite end of choice, it was re-institutionalizing people, re-traumatizing people. It was infantilization that came up in our sort of analysis, that there were some of these choices, the choice not to have a closet pole, to have cubbies. It almost felt like a daycare classroom or something, like eliminating sort of a risk, a potential risk, but how that could perhaps feel like being treated like a child. So one of the big topics that has come up has been whether or not to give people ovens and to allow them to have this full kitchen, and what it means to take away that choice because of the potential risk that somebody might leave something in the oven and burn it and set the building on fire, these kinds of things. But sort of on the other end is the potential that a person would have the opportunity to cook for themselves and to regain control of their own life, or feel empowered by that opportunity to do for themselves, to share with others, to invite someone over to a meal. You imagine someone cooking a family recipe and being able to share that with others, and how that helps a person regain sense of self and agency and ownership. So the 3 C's are at the heart of sort of our research model about ways to think about each design decision that's made.
Awesome. I always love to share when I'm going to turn over to Laura here. She's going to give us some good stuff too. But one of my favorite research studies, and every time I don't have it in front of me, I'll screw it up a little bit. But I believe it was done in a nursing home setting on 2 different floors of a nursing home. And one floor they offered, and if you've heard of it, please feel free to correct me, but they offered the residents of one of the floors the ability to have their own and water their own plants, which was a choice they had already, but all the staff did was make them aware of that choice. And I believe at least in one iteration of this study, they had to stop it because the floor with the choice wasn't dying, and the other floor, the mortality rate was much, much higher. So they just saw this small, and I always think, but I do a lot of motivational interviewing training. It's like allowing people to see choices they may already have. And I think to have control, especially if you've survived in shelters or residential care settings, choice isn't something that we give a lot of people. Some of that's just because of the limitations of the space that we have. But I just love that that thoughtful approach to giving people that ability to have control, and not to minimize even the things that we might think are small, like the ability to wash your clothes without running into another human being and having to rub up against them. Such a powerful piece of the recovery process for so many folks.
Yeah. Well, and we saw it even in the interviews, like offering people dimmer switches on their lights. like, oh my gosh, we can do that. Or, you know, I love the architects I work with, and they're always designing for light and light and light, and it's healing, and it is, and biophilia notes it's healing. You know what though? People who've experienced homelessness for a decade, they haven't had dark. So it's like, yes, we can design beautiful windows that are large and invest in those. But if I'm at the table, you're also designing blackout blinds for those, and give people that choice, you know? And it's like, you know, I think that's one of the things that folks get concerned about in supportive housing, because it's always difficult to make the budget work. And they're like, Laura, this is going to cost so much more money. I was like, no, you're already making choices over where you're investing and where you're not in affordable housing. It is about what values are at the table to design around, you know? So can I show some pictures of kind of what this looks like in practice?
Absolutely.
Does that work?
Please do.
Okay.
And just for our listeners who might be listening to this, you can go to traumainformedlens.org or YouTube if you want to watch this part of the video, because we're talking about design. So you got to have some show and tell aspects to our podcast here.
Perfect. Yes. And I will work to describe things a little bit as well with that in mind. So as we think about trauma-informed design spaces, I just want to share kind of, this is our picture of what our trauma-informed design framework is based on our research. So in the center, we have this comfort, choice, and community. And then we have our core values of what the housing team should all kind of decide our priorities, right? So it's dignity, hope, and self-esteem. It's empowerment and personal control. It's safety, security, and privacy. And as it relates to that, the thing that I think is really important to underline is safety is just not real safety. Like the door is locked, you are safe. It's perceived safety. Does this feel safe? And I think this is one of the bigger tension points in these conversations, because what feels safe to me as somebody who's always been housed and could always go to their parents and receive the support that I needed is really different than what feels safe to somebody who might have had different family dynamics growing up. And so this requires a deep level of engagement on the beginning part of a build, to really listen to those safety concerns and think about what triggers are and think about where to design around. So for example, at the Dolores Project Shelter, it's a shelter for women and trans folks, both trans men and women. And, you know, the thing we knew from working day in and day out is that for trans folks, bathrooms are really scary places. It's where they experience violence. And so in the shelter, we designed the most glorious bathroom ever. And every single piece of the design process, like from the showers to make sure there's kind of 2 doors for folks and they can change behind a thing and not worry somebody's going to barge in, to making a huge vanity along one wall with, you know, high windows so people can't peer in, but allowing that natural light. And one of the fun stories that I heard a couple months ago is the new CEO sharing in a presentation we were doing together that guests in the shelter actually have bring in chairs and hang out at the vanity because they love it so much. Like it's like a social place in the building. And I was like, okay, we did something all right, right? I mean, every time you do something like this, you're like, wow, we really messed up there. But I'm like, okay, we have a win. I love it. And then thinking about peace of mind. So cultivating this comfortable, calm ambience that supports relaxation and self-soothing. So for example, in the Dolores shelter, we put in rocking chairs because it's one of those ways that folks self-soothe, for example. Also thinking about biophilia and how nature helps us heal, as you noted before. And then joy of how we honor culture and identity and provide spaces and places that spark and nurture imagination, hope, and joy. And then it's that connection piece, right? I mean, relationships are a main way how people heal. And so how that is a priority. And then we also need to think about kind of all of the context that these spaces live within. First, the lived experience of who is going to move into this space and what it looks like, because the triggers are different for different folks and will invest in different ways depending on people's lived experience. And then really thinking about that kind of environmental context and that cultural context of that neighborhood and those identities and the city and town, you know, and what those look like and how those need to be honored and celebrated in this building. So let's dive into a couple examples here. This amazing mural artist, this is Terraza del Sol. Bimmer is this amazing artist who really, I mean, the architect complains like they stole the show. I designed this beautiful building and then you put this beautiful mural of this Native woman up, really honoring the identity of the place and connecting it to the neighborhood. And then this is on the inside. So what you see here is there's a nice lobby area and there's glass windows into a classroom. So really think about what it feels like for folks when they walk in, right? There's no hidden corners, there's no hidden hallways, there's no little places that people can hide, of really creating that connection and that openness for individuals.
And I just gotta say, were those hardwood ceilings on?
Those are, sometimes they're hardwood. We also did LVT. So you can also like make things fake so that they're a little more durable.
Yeah.
Because often the folks who move into supportive housing were hard on things. Anyway, so thinking about kind of creative ways to do that elevated design at an affordable rate. But yeah, those elements of nature that we're pulling into spaces. Yeah. The Elizabetta just opened this year, early 2020. It's in conjunction with Gorman and Company, and then also Laredin, which is a school for folks with different developmental levels. And again, beautiful mural on the outside, really honoring that neighborhood and that connection. This is the first place we did this. So what you see here is a laundry spa. So in our research, like Jennifer at one point made this point at this table and she's like, you know what spaces and buildings are most triggering for folks who've experienced homelessness? Trash and laundry. Yeah. And it's like, duh, like, oh my gosh, it really took us this long. But, you know, for folks, I mean, sometimes what is in that laundry is all the clothes that they have, right? And trash is like really highly triggering, right? People have been on the streets and been swept and, you know, horrible traumas have happened to them. And so this is the first building that we're now doing this on every single building we design, is these laundry spas. So in the laundry, there's, you know, space to do your laundry, but then, you know, for example, here it's a fitness room. So it's a really big room. Folks don't have to be close to each other and they can walk on the treadmill while their laundry is happening. The other one that we've done is this kind of spa environment. So there's tables, and then there's nice comfy chairs and sofa for folks to sit on. There's a fireplace in this one. There's TVs in others. So they can make sure that their laundry is safe and they can sit in a dignified place while their laundry is done. And this is great because then we don't need to build a separate dank little laundry room and then a separate community space. You can integrate them. And, you know, hopefully that really helps folks know that they are safe and their belongings are safe as well.
Well, and I just got to say one really quick thing here is I'm actually, I worked for the Laredin School for several years. And so there was that old residential, I think it was north of the school. And I compare that to this. And yeah. I'm trying not to cry right now. So go on. I just have to say I'm trying not to cry. You've moved me to that just because of the crappy old space versus what the folks get now. Like it moves me. Like keep going. I just had to put that in.
Deserve, you know, I mean, we all deserve dignity and respect. And, you know, even if you're on a limited budget, you can find a way to create elevated design that helps everybody feel dignified. And this is what we all want. And this is what we all need to thrive in life. And so how do we do that? And how do we as an entire community, like really elevate those thoughts? And, you know, we're not going to get balconies on our buildings. It's way too expensive, right? But there are beautiful other things that we can do and invest in big windows and invest in laundry spas, right? And like, it's actually a space saver when you combine two rooms, you know? But it does take that time to think and talk to folks and really have those deep thoughts and learn from each other. So here is pictures of Housing by Providence Network, a local nonprofit in Denver that works with youth experiencing homelessness. And we took this old mansion on Broadway and we renovated it to be a home for homeless youth. We really honored, taking an old mansion is creating dignity is easier, right? We had good bones to work with. But what we did is we really, kept all of the wood. Those natural elements are helpful for all of us, as you noted with your plants earlier, and really created like a living room that would be like a living room I'd walk into in any house. If Rochelle Micker from Group 14 Engineering was here, she'd talk about, circles and gatherings around fire pits that like coals something in us that creates a healing space. And it's also an easy way for somebody to exit. If the conversation isn't feeling great, everybody has an easy exit. So really bringing in those aspects of dignity. This is, Chad loves giving this. He's like, look at this trauma-informed building. This is an old, terribly sad movie theater that we're totally renovating. Mason Place, working with Housing Catalyst up in Fort Collins to be supportive housing for youth. And just we kind of added 10 windows on every wall that we could, and have this really great atrium that's going to have all of this greenery in the middle to really create openness. And as we think about kind of that safety and security and that peace of mind and having greenery, and also community, really providing this central area that's going to be great for folks to connect to one another. When you think about designing around with trauma-informed design, and really I get a little snarky and I'm like, trauma-informed design, I don't love like focusing on the trauma. For me, this is designing for human beings, but I don't know, that's probably a little rude. But as we think about different folks, so Providence at the Heights is for folks, the Second Chance Center, Hassan Latif, their CEO, is amazing. And really thinking about designing for folks who are leaving incarceration and what that looks like. And so really with this, again, the wood tones and all of that, and really creating inviting spaces and making sure nothing felt institutional. Again, the like wood ceiling you see here, and really that warm space. And again, no kind of hidden corners for folks to hide. This is a picture of the outside of the building. There's a creek nearby, and Hassan noted he wanted it to look like the building had just grown up from the ground. So really bringing in those images and those colors of that river.
Well, he's an old friend of mine, and I can't, following him on Facebook, we used to work together in the HIV arena, and following him on Facebook, the pride he has, the good kind of pride, not the one we're not supposed to have, but like, he just like, I get goosebumps every time I see the guy just post something, because I know how excited he is to give a population who we kind of ignore and almost set up to fail this. And so cool.
Yeah, it's fun. He's amazing. Yeah, I love being his friend on Facebook, because it's just like joy when you need it, and like real talk. Like there are really hard things happening, and we should pay attention to them and be moved to action, but also that joy. Yeah, I can't wait. We'll have the real photos of this soon. And a lightning storm came through when the photographer was there, and so there's like literally these pictures of like lightning. It's gonna be, I was like, Hassan deserved that amazing photo shoot. So it'll be fun. Here's our pictures of Laridan School across the way from the Elizabetta. And so Shopworks redesigned their building, on obviously a limited budget, nonprofit world. And what we really sought to do was think about ways to really be there for the staff and the kids and the youth who would be in this building, but how you do that on a tight budget. So we took plywood to line the walls, because the kids have kind of physical outbursts, and they need to be able to hit walls and not injure themselves, and frankly not injure the wall or have a really easily replaced wall. So we did plywood because that brings in kind of those natural elements. Bringing in chairs with joyful colors, for example. You can do really simple things to bring in those aspects. And what we found when we had designed this building is actually staff turnover drastically reduced, and outbreaks, at least for the first couple of months when kids moved in, kind of their physical outbursts diminished by 25%. So the built design does impact us, and how do we really think about that? as we think about cultural meaning of buildings, this is a quilt that served as inspiration for the Dolores Project. So the Dolores Project, again, is a shelter. And when the shelter first started, volunteers would make quilts for every new guest that they could then take with them. Now Dolores serves over 500 folks a year, so they can't, there just aren't enough quilters in Denver for that. But we really took those ideas of the quilt and applied it to the design of the building to really give it kind of sparking joy. I mean, this is a very colorful building with these purples and blues and greens in a neighborhood. You can see it from the light rail, but also, for those in the know, I mean, this is about meaning and connecting to a place.
So can I ask a quick question on maybe you were just going to talk about this, but I've seen this window design on a couple of buildings. So is there anything with I have no idea what words to use, but it looks like some shade coming out, or
so they provide a little bit of shade. I call these Chad's eyelashes on the building. The owner of Shopworks, it's this yellow bright, it's called cautionary yellow is the color of this, right? So when you're designing things, I think as we think about healing from trauma, we always think about like calming and grounding, and that's great, but actually activating joy and activation is a big piece as well about healing from trauma. And so I think for me, this is like, I just can't look at this and not put a smile on my face, right? I mean, it's that yellow and that joy. So really kind of trying to get at that in the built design. But, I mean, folks love it or hate it, right? I mean, you can't design for everybody as well, but I love them. So
I think most people who've worked in nonprofits would not complain. They may not love it, but compared to the buildings I've worked in, this would be amazing.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I think it's sort of like artwork in a sense. I mean, it doesn't satisfy any concrete like function, but it's just aesthetically pleasing. It's beautiful, and it's certainly not institutional in its color and arrangement. So
so this is my favorite view of the Dolores Project shelter. For folks who are listening, this is the view that guests get when they walk into the shelter for the first time. And you see this living room space with a television in front of you that often has a fireplace going or images of nature. To the left is a big window that goes into the shelter manager's office so that staff is close, but there is some privacy. And to the right are huge kind of almost floor to ceiling windows and an exit to a secure courtyard. So understanding that, and there's rocking chairs and like these beautiful couches that were mentioned earlier in this space. So when folks come into the shelter, and there's wood on the ceiling as well, and lots of wood tones and greenery. So when folks come into the shelter, they expect kind of harsh institutional looks, and instead they are greeted by this living room, whose goal is to create connection and give folks an easy exit, because when you're experiencing homelessness, often outside feels safer and coming into buildings can feel overwhelming. So they can enter this building and immediately exit to a safe courtyard. And so for me, this is kind of like the epitome of trauma-informed design that we were trying to reach when we were in the shelter. And another piece of designing the shelter where prioritizing the voices of residents is important, is we designed it in the old shelter. We had this terribly ugly building that we were glad to get, but anyway, concrete walls and painted and blah. And the staff office was really far from the dorm. And so when we design things, and then I bring it to the guests in the shelter and say, how does this feel to you? And they'd be like, this is great, this isn't Laura. And in one of those conversations, I was like, y'all, look, like the old staff office was like on the opposite side of the building from the dorm. Look, in this new one, the staff office is just across the hallway from the dorm, so you can get to staff easily. And they looked at me and they said, that's not good enough, Laura. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, it's so close. And they're like, we want the staff office in the dorm. And I am sitting here, always been housed. I have never not felt safe when I'm sleeping. And I'm like, that's Big Brother is watching you. Like, why would you want the staff office with windows into the dorm? And they're like, Laura, that is safety to me. If I know that staff are there and watching over me, I feel safe. And I was like, I had two thoughts. One, we have implemented trauma-informed care in our shelter if that is the relationship that our staff and our guests have. And two, wow, my intuition is totally wrong all the time, right? And so that's why you need to prioritize the voices of those with lived experience, because I thought I was giving a big win, and they're like, nope, you didn't get it right, Laura. You know, and I was glad to have that relationship where like they could push back and they could say no. But that's why, you know, thinking about those conversations, this is why this shelter looks the way it does. And that's because the guests were listened to and believed. So here's another example of a building. This is Brandon Courtyard by Volunteers of America. It's in the same neighborhood of the Dolores Project. It is beige and gray and a little bit of wood on the outside because they work with a lot of vets. And for them, cultural meaning and identity permanence was the look we were going for here. Because for vets, they have a transitory life sometimes, and this Volunteers of America, who does a lot of housing and works with folks experiencing homelessness, was like, we know what our folks need, and they need this building is solid and is not going anywhere, and we're not going anywhere either. So that's what we tried to do with that. And then we did this amazing amenity space inside. One of our lessons learned is that staff areas have to be close to amenity areas or they aren't used. Right at Dolores, we messed this up. On the second floor, there's this beautiful amenity area with garage doors with a view of the mountains. Whenever I walk in, people are always hanging out in the lobby where there's these like 4 little chairs, right? And the staff desk. So Brendan, there's this beautiful courtyard, there's a kitchen, there's a living room space, there's a little kind of business office residents can use, and the leasing office and the case managers are all kind of within visual sight of each other. So I'm really excited. This just opened again a couple months ago, and so I'm excited to go in a year and kind of hear how it's living.
You know, if I could, like, you know, I'm trying to put this into words, and I'm having trouble because the best I can come up with, and it's like if you took the best courtyard from Marriott I ever stayed in, and you times it by 5, that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah.
You know, it replaces even the darkness of the Courtyard by Marriott's with this beautiful light and space.
Yeah.
And man, it's just amazing to see. I think the attention to detail, because lighting was something I always struggled with in residential or housing. We just inherited the worst sort of overhead lighting, and oh man, it's just such a beautiful lit warm area that you just gotta watch it and look at these pictures to kind of see that. Like I don't see hotels being able to replicate this sort of warmth. I think they try, but they just I've not seen spaces this beautiful even in the hundreds of hotels I've stayed in over the past several years. So it is amazing. If I could ask one question, because, you know, I think one of the other things that I'm just so impressed by with this is the furniture. I also, if you may have seen the residential type of furniture, that big bulky wood stuff that you can maybe sit in for 2 minutes without your back hurting. This is furniture that I would love to have in my house. Is there, me asking about wear and tear, is that just a stupid question to ask? I imagine there's a sense of pride with this furniture, and I love Jennifer's cat, who so wants to get on the podcast right now.
So I'll say, as it relates to furniture, so when we were doing the bid for the furniture at the Dolores Project, we had 3 or 4 different companies come through, and kind of the last one to come in and interview, you know, and they all do great work, and that's great for them. And they were trying to figure out this guy, Nick from Elements, it's furniture, and they do office stuff and residential and hospitals. He comes in and he goes, we can give you pee-proof, bed-bug proof, permanent marker-proof furniture. And I was like, hired, like done, you understand. So a lot of the furniture, and I'm not sure if they did this one, so I can't speak, but kind of that beautiful furniture at Dolores and on a lot of our projects, honestly, you can scratch it with a permanent marker and wipe it off with a Lysol wipe. So it's kind of all hospital grade, but it doesn't look like hospital furniture.
No.
It's like comfortable and beautiful. And they just do things like if you pour water on the couch, it doesn't like get stuck anywhere where it flows through to the floor. So you can like reach down. You also do things that are single pour, so that they're like plastic chairs that have no screws and bolts, so nobody can fidget with them. They also think about kind of the gravity and how gravity works, and how things are weighted, so that you can't like pick up a chair and throw it, for example.
Okay.
And so you can find it. It's obviously more expensive than what you can find in American Furniture Warehouse, but it comes with really high guarantees. And so for me, when I was making that decision on our budget, I'm like, look, here's the deal. I'd rather invest in furniture that lasts than have to replace it every 6 months.
Yeah,
Yep.
It's just gorgeous. Like I want that couch in my house, and I have 2 huge dogs. So
Yeah, right. Yeah.
The fact it's stain resistant and pee resistant are actually
Yeah.
you answered a few of my other personal questions there.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, I might have to get the contact information from you.
So I'll just show 2 more pictures. So this is Karis. This is housing for youth experiencing homelessness up in Grand Junction. I just got to see a picture. This is under construction. These windows. This is really high elevation. I'm really pointing to kind of hope. There's a beautiful backyard with different kind of areas, green space and gardens, and kind of a fire pit with kind of natural wood around it. And then there's this lobby area where they chose to actually not have a welcome desk because they want staff to just kind of hang out. But there's little reading nooks for youth, and it's a huge atrium that's a couple stories high, to really think about hope and empowerment in the space. So when the youth are in that space, they can vision and they can dream, and the space supports that for them. And so these are just, some of the examples of ways we've really tried to bring these concepts into buildings. And every building is different. And what that looks like in each space is different. And you got to know your residents and know your staff, and also kind of know the trauma your staff has had so that you can push back against that. Because I think sometimes staff, their vicarious trauma isn't healed. And so they're going to make the wrong decisions because they want to protect folks. And in doing that, you're actually not empowering individuals to be adults who make their own choices for themselves. And so anyway, we also do a lot of like staff areas for staff's vicarious trauma, so that staff have their own space that is grounding and beautiful for them to heal, that's separate from where guests are, for example. So, I mean, there's so many different levels of what it means to design with trauma in mind and for resilience and healing. But those are kind of some of the thoughts Jennifer and I and the research team has had and have heard from residents and want to kind of elevate their voice.
Wow. Like I said, if you're listening to this, get on YouTube, come to the website. Just so impressive. Like I said, I just look at some of those layered in pictures, and I was involved around, I think it was about 2001, 2002 when we opened up like the second branch of that. And I mean, just things that I see. One is the wood, because again, a lot of those kids come to Laird because of they're too violent for the resources of the public school system. And boy, the lighting there was just something I fought, especially with a highly autistic student population.
Right.
I knew the lighting was just harming them, and yet there was very little. I mean, we tried lamps, but the hallways. So, and then I see the soundproofing as well up there.
Yep.
So I mean, just being familiar with that environment, it just, like I said, moves me to, I'm just so happy for those kids to have that. And I'm so happy for the staff to have that as well. So I know I only have you for a few more minutes. I want to kind of ask a question from maybe a scarcity point of view. So let's say I'm in my space. I don't like my space, but I haven't quite gotten that $500,000 grant yet to call y'all and refurbish it all. Is there any, maybe just some small things that you would have people from your experience, because you've done some remodels as well as the new builds, what are some things, like maybe if somebody has a few $1,000s, but not quite, obviously when they watch this, they'll want to call you and get this going. But if they just have a few $1,000s and they want to maybe take a space that's more institutionalized and make it a little bit more trauma informed, do you have any kind of just thoughts and ideas for folks that might be desperately wanting what you're doing, but just not quite there financially yet?
So I'm a social worker. I'm not a designer by any stretch. So I guess what I would say is just that what we learned, and Laura, I think you said it best when you're talking about your experience at Dolores, that you asked people who were living in that space, and then you didn't just listen to them, but you believed them. I think that there's an ocean between giving someone a chance to share and then actually like listening and believing what they say. And so we asked folks in these 3 buildings, and then there have been several focus groups and interviews carried out at different supportive housing spaces around Colorado. And so we've now asked several people, where do you feel safe? Where do you feel unsafe? Where do you meet people? Where do you connect with people? And I think that for free in a building, you could host a dinner, and you could say, or you could talk to your staff, like depending on, I mean, imagining trauma-informed spaces for everybody for anything. And you could just ask them some of these questions. And I think start there. And so they will, I think very astutely identify spaces that they love and spaces that they don't love and don't feel safe in, and then sort of beginning there with ideas.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I think I that's kind of my exact answer. And I think thinking creatively about what that looks like. You can get dimmer lights, like I know because I just did it for my house because we didn't have dimmer switches, but you can get like e-lights that can dim themselves, like the light bulb itself. And you can create like little wall things so that you can do dimmer switches, for example. If the light is either like where I am right now, it's either dark or it's like way overpowering, right? To get that middle calm area. Think about murals. Find a local mural artist. Build a gratitude tree in a central area that allows residents to add their own things onto it. What am I thankful for today? Think about how that space can be empowering, and folks, things that bring joy to folks can show up in that space as well. But invest in making places that don't feel safe safer. And think about where community is built, and maybe shift out one couch for 2 chairs so that folks can sit and have a conversation with somebody without feeling like they're touching somebody they don't know, right. For example. I mean, there's also really easy things that don't cost much money at all to have these higher level of thoughts, but it has to start with talking to the folks and asking them what feels good and doesn't feel good to them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jennifer. Besides having maybe your cat visit folks as well. So
yeah, that cat. If you want her, I will include my email.
I think I'd like to do a podcast with that cat. That cat looked like it was camera ready. So
she really loves that. Thank you for that, Matt. But just what Laura said, like some things, they don't have a huge cost attached. One of the groups, one of the spaces, they really wanted to use the computer room. They really wanted to be able to use the printer. They wanted to do things for like communication with family, for jobs, all sorts of stuff, enrichment stuff. Yeah. And they couldn't access the computer room without asking a staff member, and they couldn't print anything in the room. They had to send it to the staff offices and then ask someone for that copy. So, I mean, I feel like that's, they were pleading with us as the focus group facilitators. Please ask them to maybe put a printer in the room or to open up the room for like open access. So yeah, I do think that there are responses that you'll hear that are low or no cost.
Wonderful.
Well, and something like that, I'm just gonna, because I was in a focus group last week and I heard the same thing. If you're concerned, like so often certain rooms are locked, and put a locking cabinet in that room to save the art supplies. Also, be okay if people steal your art supplies, right? But don't lock the door to the room. Find a way to lock the things in it. Because it's so disempowering to live in a building in a beautiful community space you don't get to live in. like, I don't want to live in that building. So
and take the keep out sign off the door too.
Yeah. Yes.
Please take the keep out.
Oh my God.
So I know we've hit our time. I want to thank you both. Traumainformedlens.org. We'll get Jennifer and Laura's contact information because I'm sure people want to reach out. Laura, is it okay if I put the white paper up there too? Which,
please do.
Calling it a white paper, it's not a white paper. It's a beautiful paper. It's far from a white paper. If you like pictures, you will be very happy. I want to thank you both for your time and your work. Like I said, it just moves me. I've been thinking a lot about the basics, the what we feed people, how we help people sleep, all those things, especially looking at HRV and the health of just things we can do to improve the autonomic nervous system that might not be 3 months of intensive therapy. And boy, these spaces are such a huge step forward in how we see and deliver services that, healing and just the space itself, I think is such an amazing idea. So we're going to have the cat back on as well as you two sometime soon. So thank you so much for your work. Keep it up.
Thank you.
Traumainformedlens.org. We'll give Jennifer Laura's contact information and throw that white paper up there so you can see some of their beautiful work as well. So thank you both.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Great.